Hi, if you follow my channel regularly, you'll know how much I love to create balloon art inspired by Alice in Wonderland. And today I'm making one of the Tweedle twins. For my Tweedle twin, I'm inflating two 5-inch round balloons. I've inflated with 5 strokes of my hand pump, and I'm just putting a twist in the neck. So for me, that's 5 inches in diameter. And then I like to just press down on the table just to round the balloons off slightly, pass the necks over one another, wrap around once, twice, and tie. Okay, and make another one of these. Take your 2 pairs of balloons, connect them at the centre, and just pass one balloon over the other, one balloon from each pair, cross them over, and that will give you a cluster of 4 or a quad. These clusters are going to form the basis of our sculpture. I've inflated another 4 5-inch round balloons in red, and I've inflated these to 3.5 inches. So 2 strokes of my hand pump. And I'm just taking one of the necks from the lower cluster, pulling that up into the center of the red cluster, and then I'm just going to wrap that neck around the red balloons a couple of times, and then I can let go. And it's really important that as we're building up this sculpture, that the clusters are sitting on top of one another, so that one balloon on the top, the balloons on the top tier are sitting between 2 balloons in the lower tier. I'm using a water weight to weight the sculpture, and I'm just pulling the neck from that balloon for the water weight, and I'm just wrapping the neck around the red balloons and connecting that water weight really securely. And if you want to know how to make these water weights, I'll leave a link to my tutorial in the description. I've inflated my next 2 clusters to 3.5 inches in diameter, so that's 2 strokes of my hand pump for each balloon, and I'm connecting these clusters to the other clusters in exactly the same way, ensuring that they're sitting correctly on top of the cluster below. And a little tip I've got for you: if you look for the neck that is slightly longer, slightly stretchier, so you can see that I've got 2 necks here, one isn't very stretchy, one is quite stretchy, you will usually find if in your cluster below that there is one neck that is just a little bit stretchier, just a little bit longer than the others, and I recommend that's the neck that you use to connect the clusters together. And this cluster I've inflated to 4 inches in diameter each balloon, and that is 3 strokes of my hand pump. For my next cluster, I've inflated 2 balloons to 4.5 inches in diameter, so that's 4 strokes of the hand pump, and then I've got a 5-inch balloon and a 12-inch balloon. 11-inch balloon would do just as well, so I'm going to inflate my 5-inch with 4 strokes. So that's to 4.5 inches in diameter, and my 11-inch I'm going to inflate with 10 strokes. So those are full strokes, put a twist in the neck, and that balloon is about 6.5 inches in diameter. And then I'm going to pass the necks over one another, wrap around twice, and tie. Okay, and then I can connect the clusters together, the duplets together, the pairs of balloons, and connect them together. I can attach this to my character in the same way, but I want this large balloon to be at the front, okay? So at the moment it isn't critical, because anyway we turn the sculpture at the moment, it's the same on all sides, but this balloon will need to be at the front, and I'm just taking one of the necks from the lower cluster of balloons and just wrapping that around. Okay, so that's what we've got. If we try to attach our next cluster, which by the way I've inflated to 5 inches in diameter, so each balloon is inflated with 5 strokes of my hand pump. If I use one of the necks here to try and connect this cluster, it doesn't always work terribly well. And that's because of this large balloon here. It sort of pushes everything out of the way. So I am going to use a 260 twisting balloon, and I'm going to just wrap that around the cluster and go into the cluster below, secure that. And then I can take my next cluster, place it on the top in exactly the same way. And I'm going to use this 260 now to just wrap around several times to secure the yellow cluster in position. Okay? But you are going to find that everything just moves back just slightly. Next, I'm inflating a yellow balloon to 5 inches in diameter. So 5 strokes of my hand pump. I like to put a twist in the neck and just to hold the neck against the hand pump, that traps the air. And then this blue balloon, I'm just going to inflate with 2 strokes. So to 3.5 inches in diameter, and then I'm just going to wrap the necks around one another and tie. Okay. I've inflated a 260 twisting balloon to a tail of about 3 fingers, and we're going to do some very simple twists. Okay, so I'm going to make a bubble of about 5 inches. Okay, so just squeeze the balloon and twist it round. Okay, and it's important that when you're making your twists that you hang on to this first bubble and you hang on to the end of the balloon. Otherwise, the next twists that we're going to make will come undone. Okay, next I'm going to make a loop of a bubble of about 3 inches. Okay, and then I'm going to make another bubble that is very close in size to this one. So another 5 inches. And if this isn't perfectly the same size as this bubble, don't worry, close is good enough. Okay, so hang on to your first bubble and the rest of your balloon here at the end. That will ensure everything doesn't come undone. And I'm just going to take hold of the knot and nozzle here and wrap it into this section here. Okay, so just bring them together, wrap them around and pass the knot and nozzle through the centre. And that is now going to secure those so they're not going to come undone. Okay, give your balloon a little squeeze and a stretch just to soften it. Okay, that's just doing this, squeezing and softening and sending the air towards the end. That's going to help ensure that your balloon stays soft and that your bubbles don't pop. We're going to make another bubble to match this one. Okay, so you can just bring them side by side and measure and as close as possible and then make a twist. Okay, again, it doesn't have to be exactly the same size. Okay, and then we're going to make another bubble to match this one. So about 3 inches or so. Okay, we can make the bubble, we can compare side by side, that's close enough. And then for our last bubble, just give a little squeeze, and then we want to make another bubble to match this one, as close in size as we can. I think that's a little bit short, so I'm happy with that. And then I can just twist these sections together and I can pass this last bubble through the end here. Okay, so this is what you've got. And then I'm just going to snip off the end and I'm going to tie this little bit of excess onto the knot and nozzle. And I'm doing that twice, and then I can just snip away and cut away this excess here. So just cut that away. Do not cut too close to the knot, otherwise the knot will come undone. Okay. So take your blue balloon and just squeeze a small bubble at the top of the balloon. So just squeeze the balloons and twist a small bubble. Okay, so this is what you've got. And then take your bow and just wrap that directly into the twist that you've just made. And then just cross the loops over one another. Okay. So that's what you've got. I've inflated 2 white balloons to 5 inches in diameter. So again, 5 strokes of my hand pump, and I'm just going to connect these together here. Okay, and we want the yellow balloon to sit in between the 2 white balloons. I'm going to use my 260 to connect my next cluster. So I'm just going to sit this on the top of my cluster, pull that 260 through. I need to ensure that the bow is sitting at the front, so above this wonderful tummy, and you can see that's how it's sitting. And I'm using this 260 now to connect my balloons rather than using the necks, because this large balloon that we've made is pushing everything slightly back, so it's just easier to attach everything now with the 260, but I'm just wrapping the 260 around the balloons in the top in exactly the same way as I was doing lower down the sculpture with the nozzles from the cluster below. I've inflated the balloons in my next cluster to 4.5 inches, so that's 4 strokes of my hand pump, and I'm just attaching these in the same way. And I've positioned my 2 flesh coloured balloons at the front and the 2 orange balloons at the back, and I'm just pulling these on with this 260. Okay, so we want the 2 flesh balloons to sit just above this blue bubble here. Okay, my next cluster is 4 inches in diameter, so 3 strokes of my hand pump. And my last cluster I've inflated with just 1 stroke of my hand pump, so that's to 3 inches in diameter. And I'm just going to take this little bit of excess yellow and just wrap it around the lower clusters, and then I can just stretch that out and let it ping into the sculpture, and that's just going to disappear inside the sculpture. For the nose, I'm inflating a 5-inch balloon with just 2 strokes. Some tie. Okay, and then I'm just going to pull this into the sculpture here. So just pull the neck around one of the cheeks, wrap around a couple of times. Don't worry if things in the upper clusters are moving, and then just let the neck go. So position the nose above the blue bow, and then we can just nudge this top layer, these top 2 layers back into position. For the arms, I'm using a 350 twisting balloon. A 360 would work just as well, and I'm going to inflate with just 3 strokes of my hand pump. So that's a bubble of about 10 inches, 11 inches maybe. Put a twist in the neck and hang on to that. And then I'm inflating 5-inch balloon with just 2 strokes of my hand pump, and I'm just going to tie that directly onto the hand. Okay, I can make a twist here, and I'm just going to snip off the end and tie. Okay, I've inflated a 260 twisting balloon to a tail of a couple of fingers, and I'm just going to loop this around the wrist. Okay, so I'm just looping that around and just twisting those together, and then I'm just poking my finger through here, passing the knot and nozzle through, and then at this point I can squeeze the balloon and break it off. Okay, and this section, hang on to this section and tie that off, because you can use this for your second arm. Okay, and I'm just going to tie these together a couple of times, and I can trim away the excess. Just trim that away. Make another one of these. I'm just going to tie these 2 arms together. Pull that tight. Just give that a stretch to make sure that knot isn't going to come undone. And then I'm just going to trim away the excess here. Okay, so you've got this stretchy bit in the centre. So bring this stretchy bit just underneath the nose, pull through into the back of the sculpture. Okay, and then cross the arms over at the back. Okay? And don't worry that the arms are sticking out like this. We're going to fix that. I've got a 260 twisting balloon, and I'm just going to tie that onto the cuff here. Okay? And then I'm going to pull the 260 across the front of the body, just underneath, just over the top of the tummy. Pull that in and across to the other side. If you want to, you can just wrap that around one of the yellow balloons just to anchor that arm. So if we let that go now, it's not going to come undone. I'm just going to take a look at how things are looking. And then I want to connect this 260 to the cuff of the other arm. So just pass that through the loop there. Let's take a look. Cinch that into the body. And then I'm just going to tie that on to the cuff. I'm just tying that on. And I'm going to tie twice. And we can just adjust the level of the arms. If you want your sculpture to hold anything, then you may want to hang on to this little bit attachment point and keep that. I'm going to trim mine away. And just cut that, trim it away. So you can see how the arms are positioned at the back. And there they are at the front. I've got a yellow 260 and I'm pushing that quite far down onto the nozzle of my hand pump. Okay, and you'll see why in a second. And I'm just going to inflate with 2 strokes of my hand pump. Okay, so that's maybe 12 inches, 12, 14 inches, something like that. And I'm going to tie a knot here, okay? So we want this bit of uninflated section here. I'm just going to put a twist in the neck here, snip off the end and tie, okay? And I'm going to bring these 2 ends together and tie. And pull that tight. Okay, I'm just going to tie a second time just to be on the safe side. Okay, so this is what you've got, and I'm just going to tidy these knots up and just trim away the excess here. Okay, and make another one of these. So this is going to be the trim of the coat, of the jacket. So I'm just going to pull this stretchy bit underneath the yellow balloon here. So just pull that underneath, go over the top, twist it around, and then pull it back down. And don't worry if everything moves out of position, we'll just fix that in a moment. And then do the same thing on the other side. So just go, oops, I've not trimmed those away. Not cleaned that up. I'll just trim that up. Okay, so exactly the same way, just underneath the yellow, pull it upwards. Okay, and then just twist on the top. That's going to help ensure it doesn't just ping off, and then just pull downwards. Let's take a look and see if anything needs adjusting. I'm now going to make the hair using a 260 orange, which I'm inflating with 4 strokes of my hand pump. And we're just going to do some very simple loop twists, okay? And it doesn't even matter if these are the same size, so don't worry too much. Okay, so I'm making a loop of about 4 fingers, just wrapping that around, passing the knot and nozzle through. And again, that's going to help ensure that doesn't come undone. Give your balloon a little squeeze just to soften it. Make another loop. I'm not even going to measure that loop. So it's a little bit bigger than the previous one. And then wrap the knot and nozzle around that second loop. I'm going to make a 3rd loop. Again, not particularly measuring. A 4th loop, just loop it over, twist. Okay. And I'm going to make 1 last loop. So just twist that around. Okay. And then I'm just going to snip a hole in the end here and wrap that around a few times. Okay. And tie a knot. And I'm just going to wrap the excess around. Okay. And you're going to need to make another one of these. It's very tempting when you've made your accessories like this, like the hair, to think I'm just going to use a little piece of excess that I've got here and use that to attach to the sculpture. But I recommend you don't do that. I recommend you use a twisting balloon, a 160 or a 260, and just connect that to your piece of hair. And then just pull that into the sculpture here. That can sit quite comfortably there. You can wrap this bit of 260 around the sculpture and then just attach your other little piece of hair. And I like to attach things in this way because otherwise, if you use a little bit of excess that you've got left from the twisting, it cinches everything into the head just a little bit too much and pushes things out of alignment. So I'm just going to snip off the little bit of excess that I've got here, and then I can position my hair, the hair, however I want it to be. Okay, and so it just sits comfortably. I'm inflating a red 260 and I've pushed the nozzle down onto my hand pump, and I'm just inflating with one stroke of my hand pump. So that's maybe a 7-inch bubble. Pull the nozzle through. Okay, and then I'm just going to make a twist here and snip off the end and tie a knot. Okay, and then as we did for the trim here, I'm just going to loosely tie the ends together in a double knot, and then I can just trim away some of the excess here. Okay, and I'm going to just pull this underneath and over the top of the red balloon, pull it outwards, twist it around so that effectively locks it in position, and then pull this down so that forms the brim of your hat. I'm at that stage with this sculpture where I'm looking at it quite critically, and to my eye there's something just not quite right. I'm not quite happy with it, and it's in this area here. The face seems too flat, so I'm going to try something. Never be afraid to experiment and just try. If you think something doesn't look quite right, then tweak it here. I've slightly angled the bow down and I'm happier with that. So I spend quite a lot of time what I call fussing my sculptures and, you know, just moving things slightly. And you'd be amazed at what a difference that can make. Something that you think doesn't look quite right, and then suddenly you just nudge something down or up and it can make all the difference. So I'm going to try something here. I've used the same technique, making a small bubble with a loop attached, but this is a much smaller bubble. This is less than one stroke of the hand pump, so I've inflated with one stroke, let some of the air out, and that is a bubble of about 5 inches. And here goes. I'm going to try this. So just pushing it under the nose, over the top of the nose, lock down and bring underneath, and let's see. And I'm just going to tuck that back a little bit and curl it inwards. So I've pressure fitted it a little bit underneath the cheeks, and I'm much happier with that. I just feel this character needed some kind of a jawline and a mouth. And I'm going to use my blusher now, and I just like to apply blusher in a circular motion to the cheeks and to the nose as well. So if you try and apply this with a brush, it doesn't work. It just goes everywhere, and you end up with a horrible mess. So I just find that applying with my finger is by far the best, and I like to apply to the nose, but I tend to apply just slightly to one side of the nose. Okay, I just wanted to show you this really quickly because it's an example of the tweaking I was talking about. I've just pulled this mouth forward slightly and I think it looks much better.